we got an AA party going out there. Change of times, huh?
Back to you.
What is this, the nightly news? All right, so tonight we're on the bottom of page 84 in the Big Book. We are in step 10. And why is step 10 only 1.5 pages? Doesn't it seem like that step should be a little more complex than 1.5 pages? Because it is. We've been instructed in step 10 to include the last 20 pages that are steps 4 through 9. Page 64 through 84 are the directions. There's 20 pages, the directions on how to do steps 4 through 9. And last week we read that first, I guess it's a large paragraph, and it starts in the middle of the page on page 84. This thought brings us to step 10. And that large paragraph right there instructs us when to do step 10, which is the third line down from that middle of the page there, as we go along. When do we do step 10? As we go along, which could mean at any point in time. 10 o'clock in the afternoon, or 10 o'clock in the morning, or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or whenever you feel that there's a problem. There's another spot in step 11 where it says, the call to arms, as we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful. So that's going to be like our call to arms. When we feel an agitated, angry, it was obviously agitated, angry about something, or doubtful about something, this is when we need to take our inventory. When we're feeling less than content. We need to try to find what it is that's making us feel this way. And remember, one of the things that we were talking about is, when I first got sober, I remember I was in a halfway house, and they gave us this sheet of roughly 100 good emotions and bad emotions, or whatever you want to call them, defects of character, shortcomings. And I used to think that each one of those steps meant something different, and it doesn't. When you're in step 4, it says moral inventory, and they're talking about these things in the middle of that paragraph, about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page there on page 80. We're in the Big Book on 84, step 10. I'm going to ramble on for about 20 minutes, and we'll open up the floor for open discussion. But these are the things that we're looking for, because remember, in the third step, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. And in the fourth step, we found that we're going to try to find what's blocking us from doing that. We're going to find what is blocking us from turning our will and our lives over to the care of God. And one of the things we've learned is that God wants us to live a life of doing things for other people for God. We are to be, in the words of the third step prayer, I'll tell you what, go to the page 63, I think it is. On page 63 are the words of what it is we're trying to do. In the middle of the page there, he says, we are now at step 3. And this is good to read this, because it helps us understand what we're doing in step 10. Steps 4 through 9 are 6 steps, and step 10 becomes those 6 steps every day. Step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 we are going to be doing every single day, and the directions say as we go along, which is when we're going to be doing this. So in this third step prayer, we're going to get some ideas to what it is we're doing in all the rest of these steps. He says, we were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker, as we understood him. That was from the anti-God people, which is, it's good, because those are the people we're trying to get through to, too. That whole as we understand him thing there. God, I offer myself to you to build. I'm going to read it in like English, okay, not the biblical stuff here. God, I offer myself to you to build with me and do with me as you would. Relieve me of the bondage of self. So that's what we're looking to do here. We're trying to be relieved of self. And one of the things that we've learned in there is that self is not something we make a voluntary decision to be. It's a simple matter of like an instinct for self-preservation is what we're talking about here. I mean, look at when we find our anger. No one makes a conscious decision to get angry. You're reacting to something that's happened, that's threatened you. No one makes a conscious decision to be afraid. No one sits down and contemplates and says, I think I should be afraid of this. These are all instinctual things that are running our lives and our decisions, and we cannot get rid of these things without God's help. So he says here, relieve me of the bondage of self. And what we found, too, is that this self takes 3 primary forms. And from these three primary forms stem all the other subforms. The primary forms are anger, fear, and guilt. And from anger, fear, and guilt stem all the other subforms, as he says in the fourth step. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to be relieved of self, and we're asking God to take away our difficulties, which are the same thing, that victory over these difficulties will bear witness to those I would help. So we're trying to get rid of self so that we can help other people for God. Those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life, may I do your will always, God. So this is the third step prayer, and it's a pretty descriptive. I keep referring back to this prayer because it's one of the best places that describes what we're trying to do in AA. We're trying to get rid of what blocks us from doing God's will. We're asking God to take away these difficulties and to relieve us of self. And one of the things I've learned over the years is, remember that many people see the fourth step inventory as some kind of an indictment of how bad of a person we've been. Like, oh, look at you, look, you've been lying and cheating and stealing from the people who care about you. And it's not an indictment of who we are. This is a search to find what's been blocking us from God. And when we look at it from that standpoint, it becomes a much easier task for us. For me, it did. So back to page 84, at the bottom of the page, we're actually into the promises of the 10th step. And many people go, you mean the promises of the 9th step? I go, well, this is what I've heard them called. And if you look at them when they have that piece of paper that says the 200 promises of the Big Book or whatever it is, I don't know how many, this comes out as one of them. And it really does. It's just a bunch of things like we feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality and safe and protected. There's many people call this the promises of the 10th step, so that's what I've come to know it as. But so back to reviewing what we were doing in step 10 here, we're looking to find those most common manifestations of self. Those are the words of the fourth step. Most common manifestations of self that block us from a life of self-sacrifice for others. And we're looking to, once we find them, we don't just write it down on paper and share it with somebody. That's important. Step 5 is important. But remember, we still got 6, 7, 8, and 9. Hang on. I got to sneeze. Whew, I don't know where that came from. We have 3 spiritual solutions that we are to implement into our daily lives. And those spiritual solutions are, remember, we made the list of when we were angry, and we had to be free of this anger, because anger is what blocks us from being this agent of God's outpouring unconditional love towards others. The number one thing that keeps me from being that word, agent of God, is in the third step. It says he is the principal and we are his agents. He is the director, and I don't guess it says anything after that, but it says God was going to be our director. He is the principal and we are his agents, meaning that we have to be like emissaries or agents of this loving God. And how much of an agent can I be if I'm filled with anger all the time? I can't. This is what's blocking me from doing God's will. I made a decision to do God's will. That anger is what's keeping me from doing it. Fear is keeping me. When someone, how I boil it down, and I say it to a lot of my sponsees, I say everything in relation to step 12, okay? You've essentially made a decision to help others find their way to a God of their understanding, is what you've made a decision to do. Because if you'll look at it, all the first 11 steps, sole reason for existence, is to bring you to step 12. Step 12 is the definition of how to have faith in God. You ask God to remove your fear. Of course, you write it down. You recognize it, write it down, share it with another person in step 5. And then in step 12, we direct our attention to helping others and thinking of others. And that is the essence of what do they call unconditional love. Of when I do things for other people through the 12 steps, I place no conditions on them. And whenever I see people doing that, I try to share in a meeting when I see people that I know are doing this. Like, I'll give you an example. A lot of the guys that I know sponsor people. They give them directions on what to, you better not do this, you better not do that. You're fired. If you don't call me at a certain time every day, you're fired. If you drink, you're fired. If you do this. My first thought is, what? Does that sound like a loving Creator's direction? I don't think so, because I don't believe in tough love. That's one of the things I've been wrestling with over the last few years, that tough love is an oxymoron. I heard a man say, you know what tough love is? That's a word I used to justify my turning my back on people that I should have been there for, you understand? That was I cleared my conscience by saying, I didn't help that guy because he went out and relapsed, and I turned my back on him. He needs a little tough love. Instead of saying, hey, sit down and figure out where we went wrong with this. We'll review each one of these steps and spend hours, if we have to, sitting down trying to figure out where we went wrong. Now, which one of those two do you think is God's will? Do you think it's somebody went out and drank and you turned your back on them and said, don't even talk to me, get away from me, you're drinking, you bum? Or if they went out and drank and they came back in and you said, let's sit down and try to figure this out. I think we can get you sober if we work hard at this. I think it's the one where you work hard at it. I don't think it's the one where you turn your back on people. But anyway, what's blocking us from being that and doing that type of personality is this anger, the fear, and the guilt that we feel. And these are the most common manifestations of self. Anyway, back to where we hadn't read a thing yet. So anyway, at the bottom of the page, about 4 lines up, and we cease fighting anything and anyone, these are the promises of the 10th step. And you have to ask yourself, these are the things that happen to us if we carefully followed directions, and we are in step 10 where we're doing this daily inventory and we're applying these spiritual solutions in our lives. And we have ceased fighting anything and anyone, even alcohol. For by this time sanity will have returned. Now, what does that statement mean? For by this time sanity will have returned. Well, he's not talking about being a sociopath and not being a sociopath anymore. He's not talking about being a schizophrenic and now all of a sudden we're no longer schizophrenic. He's saying now we react sanely to that first drink. We're only talking about alcoholic sanity. Psychiatrists do not prescribe 12 steps for people who need the pills that they give them to fix them, you understand? The 12 steps are for alcoholics who can't say no to a first drink. If you say to yourself, I cannot drink, no matter what, I don't want to drink, and you're drunk anyway, that's insane, okay? This restores us, for by this time sanity will have returned, means that we are able to say no to a first drink. And you look around and you go, what the hell happened? Where'd that come from? I can't believe I stopped drinking. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as if from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. Now, there's a question that might come to your mind right there. How exactly does that work? How is it that automatically I am now able to say, without even thinking about it, I don't have to stop and say, do I want to drink, yes or no? No, you automatically think, of course I don't want to drink. What are you, crazy? I'm an alcoholic. I can't drink. Automatically this happens, and you have to ask that question, just exactly how does that work? I'd like to know, because I hear people in AA say, oh, it's mysterious, and the ways of God, who's the question? The ways of God, he's mysterious, and this AA thing. I've heard many guys with 20 years go, I don't know how this AA stuff works, I just know that it works. And my first thought is, what are you, like retarded or something? I would have to know how this AA thing works. I could not go on. If I thought for 1 minute that it was some kind of sleight of hand magician type crap, and there was really nothing there keeping me sober except for the mysterious ways of the universe or something, screw that. I don't believe in this seance thing. I mean, some people do, sitting around a group talking to your dead uncle or something, and not to make fun of it, but some people really believe in that, but I don't. I don't believe in... To me, the connection to the other world that I'm looking for a connection to a God of my understanding, and it's going to take place here in the real world, and it can be described easily by saying that I'm going to get out of myself by the process that we're doing here, and I'm going to force myself to think of other people and convince my subconscious human mind that it's in my best interest to live my life in sacrifice for others, because if I don't, then I'm going to be drunk, and if I'm drinking, it's over anyway. My life means nothing anyway. But anyway, over the years, I've learned myself that, like the promises state, that after I've done these steps for a while and I begin to think and live this new way of life, that this is really what I should have been doing all along. That it scared the hell out of me at first, but once I started doing it, I said, well, why didn't anybody say this is where we were supposed to be in the first place? But anyway, what he says that this has happened sanely and automatically. Remember that we were talking about that fear. We believe, we don't have any proof positive, but other than the fact that AA seems to be working for most of the people who, what does it say in those who come to AA and really try, 75% stay sober. And then I hear people come in here and go, oh, yeah, 3% of us are going to make it. The other 7%, your history. But that's not the truth. You have to categorize the people who come in here as if you went to school and never picked up a piece of paper, never had a book, never wrote anything down, never went to any classes. Well, okay, so they went to classes. Like when you're categorizing people in AA as people who made it and people who didn't make it, then you have to take into consideration those who really tried. Those who sat down and went through the steps with a sponsor and understood what it was they were doing, versus the people who come through that door, sit down, kick their feet up, and have no idea what we're doing in here. And they sit back in the back and joke around, answer their phone in the middle of the meeting, hit on the women, the men, and they get up and leave early and come in late. You know, if you're categorizing those people as someone who came to AA and didn't make it, I think you're wrong, because you could say that about anything like school or college. Or if you sat in school and did absolutely nothing and they failed you, would you be surprised? I don't think so, but if you gave it everything you had and got an A, see, the difference is some people come in here and it's not that important to them. Therefore, I believe, like it says, those who really tried are the people who come in here and make it. And anyway, what I was getting at was that the fear, we believe that fear is at the root. It is the cause of the obsession. Once you have cleared the addiction that your body has to alcohol, once you have gotten rid of, the detox. And Bill Wilson even says, if you look in the early AA, all of these early AA people came from hospitals and sanitariums. When Bill Wilson got back to New York, he didn't find Dr. Bob at the hospital. He found him through Walter Tunk and some priest guy. He found him from a priest, and Dr. Bob had been to the detox a number of times anyway. But anyway, the story is, where did Bill and Bob go? They went straight to that hospital in Akron, Ohio, where they found AA number 3 and 4, 5, and that's where it even says that Dr. Bob administered to 5,000 alcoholics, all from that Akron hospital, all from that hospital. He didn't find them at the AA meeting. He didn't find them at the drunk or wherever, at the jail or something. He found them at that hospital. And when Bill Wilson got back to New York, where did he go? He went straight to those 2 hospitals, Towns Hospital and Knickerbocker Hospital. Those 2 hospitals is where he found all the people that they started. The first buses that came in from AA came in from those hospitals. But once your body has been thoroughly cleansed of its dependence on alcohol, it then becomes a matter of your mental defense against the first drink, on the idea that you develop an obsession for the first one. It's not just a thought. You don't go, hey, should I have a drink? No, I don't think so. It becomes an obsession. That's all you think about. I got to have a drink. And the next thing you know, you're drunk. And the way we believe in AA is that obsession, it comes from fear. And we believe that because the people who have made an attempt to conquer this fear have developed a defense against that first drink. And that's why he says we will find that this has happened automatically. Because, as the 4th step puts it, we have gotten to the underlying causes and conditions that are at the root of the obsession for the first drink, which is fear. Fear is, and the other forms we have are anger and guilt, and those two are rooted and based in fear. That they come from, that we would have no guilt if we weren't afraid of the consequences of being dishonest versus honest. We would have no anger unless it was that all anger is rooted in fear. When we make our list of resentments, on that 3rd category, that 3rd line in that thing, it says fear. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties of Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. That's essentially saying that every single thing that you are angry about is really something that you're afraid of. But it manifests in anger in most of us. Back to the reading. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. We're combating fear, and we're given this immunity to that first drink. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, and neither are we avoiding temptation. And most people would say, hey, that sounds insane. If you knew how I was living my life, there's no way that I could come to this point. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. Remember, what we're dealing with here is the idea that fear is the driving force and that we are attempting to free ourselves of this fear. One of the things that he says is about this this God consciousness that was mentioned back in the 5th step, where he says we have begun to become God conscious. And then when we went over that, we said, now, wait a minute, what does that mean? That in the fifth step, I have begun to become God conscious, that somehow I start to feel the presence of God in my life, because we are instructed here to bring God into these spiritual solutions. When I am angry, as the fourth step puts it, I write it down. I make those 3 columns. Who am I angry at? What the cause of the anger, what it is that they did that made me angry, and what part of my life that it affects, my self-esteem, my personal relations, and that it is all based in fear. And then we are instructed to share this with another human being, tell someone else that I'm angry at something that someone else has done, and then we're instructed to ask God to help us forgive this person. We're asked, in the third step, he says, we could not be rid of self without God's help. And why is it that we can't be rid of self without God's help? Because this is an instinctual thing that's running our lives. That when I get angry, I don't make a decision to get angry. I don't sit down on a piece of paper and go, okay, I'm going to get angry about this because of that guy. Remember, you're instinctually, you ever see people fight? And can you stop and say to yourself, that's a grown man or a grown woman doing that? Do you think that if they had time to really think about something like a parking spot out in the 2 people fighting over a parking spot, and you can say to yourself, are you really grown people fighting over a parking spot out there, or something just as stupid as that? Anything. I mean, there may be some serious things to fight over, but most things you might see are really quite trivial. It's just that these people feel threatened, and they feel like there's someone's walking on them, and their instincts, my security, my self-esteem, that's a big one. Self-esteem getting stomped on by somebody, here we go, let's fight it out. But the spiritual solutions instruct us to bring God into each one of these. God, please help me to forgive this person that I am angry at. Not because that guy, he needs the loving hand of, because I need to find what's blocking me from God. That's what. I can't stop drinking. And here I am storming mad for 3 days over some stupid something or other. I have to have God's help to get rid of this stuff, okay? And I have to learn to forgive people, not because I think that they need to be forgiven and God is a loving, but because I'm a stark raving lunatic when it comes to drinking, and I got to do something, so I must learn to put out of my mind the anger for what other people do that I feel like they're stomping all over me. I'm feeling like I'm threatened by them. I have to get rid of that anger. It is the chief stumbling block to being an emissary of God's outpouring unconditional love for others, towards others. It's what's going to get me close to God, and God is going to keep me safe and protected, as this is stating here. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. This is how our experience. This was our experience. This is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Fit spiritual condition, once again, a reference to finding these 3 most common manifestations of self: anger, fear, and guilt, that block us from receiving and doing. Now, all these are words from the previous pages that block us from receiving and doing God's will, which is a life of self-work and sacrifice for others, is how Bill puts it in his story. For if a person failed to enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not overcome the low spots that lie ahead. It is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. We are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Every day is a day we must carry the vision of God's will into all of our activities. What is this vision of God's will? Back to the third step. I am to be an agent of God's outflowing unconditional love towards other people. And what's blocking me from doing that is anger, fear, and guilt. Okay, we have the spiritual solutions to those: 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. 8 and 9 we make amends. 6 and 7 we learn to forgive. And 5 we admit. And in 12 is the faith in God, which is where we're headed with all of this. One of the things that I tell my sponsees is, I'll be done in a few minutes. We'll open up the floor for discussion. It's my interpretation of the steps that you don't wait to have a spiritual awakening to start helping other people through the 12 steps. Because if you do, you'll never have it. And I'll explain what I'm talking about. First of all, Ebby Thatcher was the guy that sponsored Bill Wilson through another group called the Oxford Groups, where they had unofficial 6 steps and an official 4 absolutes: the absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. And Ebby Thatcher was instructed that he would be free of his alcoholism if he helped other people. They didn't say alcoholics, but he thought to himself, I know the perfect guy, my childhood friend, Bill Wilson. Now, this is just a story because if you want what they have, you do what they did. And to see the most basic, simple idea of Alcoholics Anonymous and how it works is to take, for example, one of our, the guy that started the thing, Bill Wilson, and to see how it happened for him and how it's happened for millions of people since, including myself. You take Ebby Thatcher helps Bill Wilson through the steps, and Bill Wilson gets sober and never drinks again. Never takes another drink as long as he lived. Bill Wilson, however, has Ebby Thatcher for a sponsor. Ebby Thatcher drinks. Ebby Thatcher was able to carry the message of, helping others to be free of self, to get out of self. You do things for others. He was able to carry that message to Bill successfully, but he did not have the spiritual awakening, or he wouldn't have drank again. Therefore, I don't think that as the 12th step instructs us, it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, period. And it says, okay, take the idea that now you have had a spiritual awakening. At that point, you can begin to help other people have their spiritual awakening because you have experienced it, and someone who has experienced it could better explain it to someone else. Therefore, you cannot start helping other people until you have had a spiritual experience. And if you ask yourself, okay, so what is the determining point in my sobriety in which I can stop and say, I have had my spiritual experience now. I am sure of it. There's the event. There's the day that it happened. There's the time that it happened. I have had my spiritual experience, because for me, that point has never actually happened. I've got over 20 years of sobriety, and the only thing I can say was there was one day when I was looking at the third step. I was in jail again. This is 20 years ago. And I was looking at the third step, and I said, okay, I get it. I turned my life over to God unconditionally. My only reason for living is to serve God, and if that don't work, then I'm out of here. And for me, there was a certain point that I could say, but as far as those other years that go along with that, I can tell you that there was no real point that I could say that I could pinpoint and say, that was the day I had my spiritual experience, my spiritual awakening. They're the same thing, by the way. I've heard many people say, what's the difference between them? The difference is Bill wrote spiritual experience, and this editorial board that wrote God as we understand him didn't like that word, so they put that's the only place awakening appears is right there. He's got 3 or 4 other places where he says spiritual experience. So the point being that you don't stop and wait, because our spiritual solution to fear is unconditional love, doing things for others. The 12th step is the spiritual solution to fear. And if you wait, this is what a lot of my sponsees are doing. They're saying, well, I don't really feel qualified to take other people through the 12 steps because I don't have a real working knowledge. And the only thing I can say to them is, look, neither did I. When I first started helping other people, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But you have to start at some point and begin to make this transition into somebody who starts thinking of other people and doing things for other people. Even though, and I hear there's a woman who keeps attacking me in here, and she says, you're dealing with people's lives here, and you're going to sponsor somebody, and you don't know what you're doing. You could kill them. And my only answer to that is, yeah, but what if you do nothing? So your 2 points are that, 1, you do absolutely nothing, make no attempt to help them whatsoever, or have some idea what you're doing, maybe a little bit, and try to help them a little bit. Try anything. It's better than nothing, right? And her argument is, you're dealing with people's lives, and they need someone who's experienced and knows what they're doing. And then how the hell are we ever going to get people who are experienced if you don't start from point A, where you didn't know what you were doing, and you started helping people and said, okay, let's get going. And I tell you how I started. I was forced to do it by my sponsor. My sponsor grabbed some other guy who asked him by the scruff of the neck, and he grabbed me, and he pointed us together, and he said, you and you. And they had about 4 other guys around him, and he goes, you and you, you and you, and you and you. Because he was just overwhelmed with people. The guy had like 40 years of sobriety or something. But anyway, the point being that you don't finish the 12 steps, finish the first 11 steps before you start helping people with step 12. I recommend, look at Bill Wilson, 6 months of sobriety. Dr. Bob had 3 days of sobriety when he and Bill helped Bill Dobson. Can you say that he was done with the 12 steps in those 3 days? That he wasn't even done detoxing, in my opinion. But he stayed sober, never drank again. Can you say that Bill Dobson, with a few days of sobriety under his belt, and the same thing with all the people, that they were 2 weeks, that one of the things that made the Cleveland group the biggest group of AA's expansion, it came from Akron, Ohio, spawned the Cleveland group, but even Akron and New York both admitted through Bill and Bob that Cleveland was the one that was largely responsible for the expansion of Alcoholics Anonymous. When it came to Dallas and Miami and Atlanta and all the other cities that sprung up after those first three, Cleveland was the third group that sprang up after New York. But then they asked themselves, they said, why has Cleveland got literally thousands of people that they sobered up, and we're still in the hundreds in AA in New York and in Akron, where it was founded and made in New York and Akron? Why are these two groups only sprouting hundreds of people that are sober, and Cleveland has got thousands, and they have other cities that have been directly connected to it? Because Cleveland was assigning sponsees when they came through the door. The Cleveland group said they were so overwhelmed, they only had like 3 guys who had 2 years of sobriety, and they started assigning people as they can walk through the door. They said, new guy, you're next in line. You got 2 weeks of sobriety. You help this guy through the door. And they're all doing the same thing. They're going, I don't know anything. Well, neither did we when we started. That's how you learn. You got to get out there and do it, right? You got to start sponsoring people. How are you ever going to get to be a master at sponsoring people if you don't start as that guy who didn't know a damn thing about what he was doing? So the moral of the story being, when he says here, what we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. We're going with all of these steps into step 12. Remember that. I don't want to go any further. We'll open up the floor for open discussion, and we got maybe not plenty of time. We usually only have like 4 people in here, so usually people I know. Who wants to share? Anybody? Anything on? We'll pick up where we left off. Daily reprieve contingent on our spiritual condition. Would anyone like to share on step 10 or any of the promises or anything about the 12 steps? Questions and answers? I don't mind. Hey. The Big Book meeting. We're on page 85 at the end of the promises of the 10th step. It's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. But we're going to review real quick just for a minute where we've come to. And so over the last few weeks, we've been actually reviewing step 10. And remember that step 10 is steps 4 through 9, which is the inventory process and the application of the spiritual solutions to, as the book puts it, to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves that block us from receiving and doing God's will. Remember, in the 3rd step, we made a decision to turn our lives over to the care of God. And we're trying to find out what's blocking us from doing that and apply the spiritual solutions to be free of these things that are blocking us from receiving God's will and doing God's will. And we learned in the 3rd step that God's will is that we are to be an agent of God. How does he put it? 63, isn't it? 63, the 3rd step prayer. We are to be a power of, wait a minute, it says, take away my difficulties, which is what we do in 4 through 10, or 4 through 9. Take away my difficulties, that victory over these difficulties will bear witness to those I would help of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life. May I do thy will always. So we're looking to find what blocks us from doing God's will, which is the unconditional love, the way I've experienced it, the way I understand it, is that we are to be agents of an outflowing unconditional love towards other people for the God of our understanding, as an agent of God, trying to do his will. And we learned that there are 3 primary things that block us from doing this. And from these 3 primary things stem all the other sub-forms. The primary forms of self, the most common this is the words that he uses in the 4th step, the most common manifestations of self are anger, fear, and guilt. Guilt coming from the harms that we had done others. We don't get to decide whether we're going to feel guilty. We don't get to decide whether we're going to get angry or not. And we don't get to decide whether we're going to feel fear or not. All of these things operate below the level of conscious thought. That's in the fourth step, in that third column of the fourth step, the part of our lives that it affects. Why is that column there? That's to teach us that we are essentially at the mercy of our instincts for self-preservation or survival. The instinct for survival, and the way that I experience it, my sponsor always said, I am afraid of losing the things that I have and not getting the things that I want. And those, in my opinion, are instinctual things, things like your health and money and a place to live and a job and, the things that everybody's looking for, a family but anyway, so anger, fear, and guilt are the primary forms of this selfish, self-centered behavior. And how we apply the spiritual solutions to those are for anger, we apply forgiveness. And for guilt, we make amends for the things that we have done to free ourselves of the guilt. And for the fear, we apply faith in God. And we haven't gotten there yet, but faith in God is step 12. And this is where the whole process of being free of selfish, self-centered behavior and thoughts. And, that's one of the things that I've been focusing on for the last few years is that the selfish, self-centered behavior begins with thoughts. And anyway, we'll get into the spiritual solutions. In this 10th step, he's going to tell us that we have this God consciousness that we are beginning to have, and that we're beginning to sense the flow of God's Spirit into us. And the things that he's talking about here is when we begin the daily application. And remember, in step 12, he says to practice these principles in all our affairs. And the way I've learned the 12 steps, and he also says if we follow directions thoroughly, if we follow directions, how does he say it? Now I can't find it. It was just there a minute ago. Anyway, if we have carefully followed directions, that's what he uses here at the bottom of the page here. But if we have carefully followed directions, what we've been explained to is that we're going to bring God into our life every day. I'm going to ask God to help me to forgive the people that I'm angry at. I'm going to ask God to help me to make these amends. How should I make them, and who should I make them to is, the list that we have. I'm going to ask God to help me have faith and to help me find what it is that he wants me to do, which is step 12. When we get to 11, there's a question in step 11, what do you want me to do, God? And the answer to that question is step 12. But we'll read a little bit here and try to stop and understand what it is that he's explaining to us here. It is easy. This is like the first full paragraph down from the top on 85, and this is step 10. Step 10 is only 1.5 pages because step 10 is really encompassing the 20 pages before it, which are steps 4 through 9. So there are really 20. If you'll read step 10 in the context that it's encompassing the entire 20 pages before it, it's 21.5 pages because you're being instructed to do steps 4 through 9 every single day now, not just the past. 4 through 9 were the past, and step 10, which encompasses 4 through 9, in your daily your daily inventory is every day. So it is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. That's pretty self-explanatory there. I work with a lot of people, and I see a lot of people. Some people stay sober, and you would swear they should drink, and some people drink, and you would swear that they were going to do the right thing and stay sober. So I don't know how you could say who's going to stay sober or who's not. Nobody knows that but God. But it does seem to me that people who are more active in Alcoholics Anonymous and doing the right things that they should be doing, like a daily inventory and helping others through the steps, stand a better chance of getting sober and staying sober. We are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve. I hear people refer to this one all the time. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And I agree with that in part, but my experience with it is that I have been relieved of my obsession for that first drink, and I do have respect for alcohol's ability to come back into my life, but I have not had the serious thought of a drink in over 20 years, 21 years almost. And I understand that this is more of a humility aspect, because Dr. Bob used to say something along the lines of, I don't want to get arrogant and egotistical and say that I will never take another drink, and that's all there is to it. But Dr. Bob did say, I believe as long as I keep doing the things that I've been doing, and as long as I keep thinking the way that I've been thinking, that I do stand a pretty good chance of staying sober for the rest of my life. But this daily reprieve is sort of a humility aspect of not letting because remember, ego is the number one enemy that we have. And in a sense, really the definition of that we use for ego really is the selfishness and the self-centeredness and the idea that essentially I am God. That's the complex that alcoholics have, if you haven't figured that out yet. That we feel as though we are in control of our lives and we control our destiny. And I try to remember to myself that I can't even control my breathing. I can't even control my heartbeat when I'm sound asleep in the middle of the night. That you don't control anything. God is in control of your heart beating. He's in control of your breathing. And that's how in control God is of every single aspect of our lives. And what he's doing here is he's saying that what we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition, is sort of a submission to God. That's one of the favorite terms that I've learned in AA over the years was submit. Submit your will to God, and submission to God's will is our main goal in our lives. Every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will in all of our activities. So what is this vision of God's will into all of our activities? Is I guess different people of different religions might have a different point of view, but the way I understand it is, back in our third step prayer, the God's love and God's way of life, the way I understand it personally, is unconditional love, an outpouring unconditional love towards other people for this God, as an emissary or an agent of God, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. And remember, what's blocking us from that is anger, fear, and guilt. And from those three stem all the other subforms. So we just focus on those three, and everything else will come into its rightful place. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. That's pretty close to the third step prayer there, wasn't it? Back on 63, how can I best serve thee? Thy will not be. Bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. How can I best serve thee? Thy will be done, not mine. Thy will, not mine, be done. Sorry. These are thoughts which must go with us constantly. My experience with that is over the years, it's literally been burned into my brain that I don't have to tell myself that anymore. It's second nature. It's like in the promises of the ninth step, where he writes, we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us, is a reference to the fact that I'm teaching my subconscious mind a new process, a new way of thinking. And this, where he says that these thoughts must go with us constantly, he's talking about every day is a day we must carry the vision of God's will into all of our activities. How can I best serve God? His will be done, not mine. And these are thoughts which must go with us constantly. And through the regular practice of the 12 steps, it will become a natural working part of your mind. You won't have to stop and say, oh, wait a minute, you're here to serve God. Remember, you're here to do God's will, and you're straying again. You don't have to keep reminding yourself of this. The longer you're sober, the more it becomes embedded into your mind that you're convinced of this. That's my experience with it. I don't drift further away. And remember, this has got a lot to do with being here in AA and helping others through the 12 steps too. And if you're not, going to meetings and you're not helping other people through the 12 steps, then you're headed for trouble, for alcohol is a subtle foe. It's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action. Remember those words there, action. That's a big part of our recovery process here. We've been over that. We can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It's the proper use of the will. So the proper use of the will is to surrender it back to God, is what he's saying there. We can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It's the proper use of my free will. The proper use of my free will is to see it for what it is and offer it back to God. And the way that a man explained it to me many years ago, and it sunk in when I heard him say this, and it, for myself, this has been one of the most important things in my recovery and in my life. And what I heard this man say was that God had two choices when he made this place and he made us. He said, I can force these people to do what I want them to do, in which case they'll be just like all the rest of the animals, mindless and sort of going throughout their day, or I can give them each one of them their own individuality and make each one of them a separate person, and have each one of them will have their own free will. And the problem with that is that we begin to think of ourselves as the God of our world. That some reason we begin to get this ego that convinces us that we are in control of our destiny and we don't need any God to explain this place. And you hear it all the time, and people that are atheists or agnostics, and like I was, most people in AA were of agnostic temperament, the way I understand it. Very few people were true atheists, but there was something I was reading about one of Bill Wilson's sponsor, the Father Ed Dowling, had said that even he was a very religious guy, and he was dedicated to religion, and he even said, I think when we're all standing at the gates of either heaven or hell, we're going to stand there and go, wow, it really is real. That right to the end, they were agnostic and weren't really sure what was going on, and what was right up to the very end, that everybody is essentially an agnostic, right up till the day that you actually really do find out whether there is something there or not. But we can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. Is that the proper use of free will is to intellectually see it for what it is, and the chief stumbling block to serving our main purpose in this world that God made, and offering it back to God. And I had a little slack from some friend of mine here recently who said that offering your will back to God doesn't mean he's going to take it. And, I never made that statement. All I say is that the important thing is that we have to make the offer, and that God never does actually take your free will back and you're relieved of it and you no longer have your free will. The point is that I have to make the offer to God and say, essentially, I hold my free will in my hands and say, I see this free will as an absolute necessity, a necessary ingredient for individuality as a person. And I also see it as my chief stumbling block to serving my purpose of being an agent of God's outpouring unconditional love towards others, because I'm so afraid for myself. I have little concern for others unless it has something to benefit me in some form or another. And that's the truth of the matter. And the only time I really have genuine concern for other people is not because I have genuine concern, but because I feel that there's something for me to gain in this situation. And in order for me to become somebody who has genuine concern for other people on the basis of being an agent of God's outpouring unconditional love, I must see this free will as my chief stumbling block to that. I am so afraid for myself. I just don't have I don't know what else to say other than God is the source of this unconditional love, and offering my will back to him and making the offer is the key to this, anyway. Much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his Spirit into us. So here in the 10th step, he's making a reference to the fact that we are beginning to sense the flow of God's Spirit into us. And it stands to reason that a normal person would stop and say, well, wait a minute. Where in my daily life do I sense the flow of God's Spirit into me? And the answer to the question, if you're doing it properly, I believe, is yes, and you can see it where you're doing a daily inventory. You're going to sit down at any given time during a day and say, am I angry right now? And if you find something that you're angry about, you're going to stop and say, okay, I have to get rid of this anger because this is what's blocking me from being an agent of God's outpouring unconditional love. How am I going to get rid of this anger? I'm going to ask God to help me forgive the person. Remember, the directions were, I think the direction said we see them as if they were perhaps spiritually sick. They, just like me, are spiritually sick. And then, let me see if I can remember without turning to the page. We ask God to help us, show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And then we turn our thoughts to what we can do for that person. The action involved in the spiritual solution of forgiveness is to be of help to the person that you are angry with. How can you be of help to the person that you are angry with is the action part. And you ask God to help. What should I do for this person? Help me to forgive this person. And when you got this other problem that we have, which is guilt, we turn to making amends, and you have a list of who it was that you had harmed. Okay, remember, no one makes a decision to feel guilty. If you're a normal human being, you do something that hurts somebody else, you are going to feel guilty about it. And that guilt is something that takes up time in your head. The understanding that I have about it is, a man told me, he said, okay, so you got angry with somebody and you spent about an hour stewing in the anger from one point or another. That was an hour of wasted time that day. Time blocked from God's will, God's unconditional love. And then there was something that I had done that hurt somebody, and I felt guilty about it. And that was, say, during 2 or 3 periods during that day, it might have been another hour and a half that I felt guilty about something that I had done that had hurt somebody. And then there was the fear that I had. Some 3 hours out of that day was spent afraid of this or that, or maybe one big thing that has happened in the last few weeks or something that's just been bugging the hell out of me. And that fear is the number one thing. Of course, remember that fear is at the root of anger, and fear is also at the root of the guilt that we feel. For no one would have harmed anyone if it wasn't. No one would have been dishonest if we weren't afraid of the consequences of being honest. So fear is essentially the root of this. But we're also saying that there's two big ones: the guilt and the anger, that we need to pay close attention to. And the spiritual solution to fear is faith in God. And once again, there's action involved, and that is step 12. That faith in God is going to be what you do, not what you think. And so too is forgiveness is going to be based on the action. Making amends is based on the action. Freeing myself of my guilt is based on the action of making the amends. Freeing myself of my anger is based on the action of how can I be of help to the person that I'm angry at. And freeing myself of fear is going to be based on the action of getting out of myself and doing things for others. And primarily there's one form of that in AA that this form takes, and that is step 12. Remember that the sole reason for all of these first 11 steps is to bring you to step 12. That their main reason for being even a part of this process is that we feel that these first 11 steps will bring you into the best person that you can be to help others find their way to a God of their understanding. So we have begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us. To some extent, we have become God conscious. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense. So you see where he says we have begun to develop this vital sixth sense, meaning that we haven't actually developed it completely. We still got 2 steps going. But we must go further, and that means more action. Step 11, this is the beginning of step 11. It's 2.5 pages. And step 11 is going to do the same thing that step 10 did. Step 11 is going to tell us to do the inventory at the end of every day. At 11 p.m., just before we go to sleep, we're going to review the entire day. So there are actually 3 inventories. The 4th step inventory, the 10th step inventory, which we had just reviewed, which is the directions for the 10th step inventory are the 3rd line down on page 84 in the middle of the page there. This thought brings us to step 10. As we go along is the directions for when to do the 10th step inventory. In the 12 and 12, they call them a spot check inventory and a daily inventory, which is pretty much what this one's doing, but it's just those words, spot check and daily, aren't in here. But I call them, because of the big book, I call them the as we go along inventory and the when we retire at night inventory, because those are the actual phrases used in here. So step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. So in this step, he's going to teach us how to pray and how to meditate. And it's not rocket science. If you'll read the step clearly, it says we pray only for one thing and one thing only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And in this meditation, you're supposed to be stopping and listening for what you think it is. And, you know, I've been criticized by a couple of people who I really don't look up to, but they do a lot of talking around here, you know, which reminds me of that. I was watching, what was it, Wizard of Oz, and Dorothy's talking to the Tin Man or whatever, and he says, I need a brain. I don't have a brain. And she goes, well, how can you talk if you don't have a brain? He goes, oh, that's nothing. I know a lot of people who do an awful lot of talking, and they don't have any brains. But anyway, the idea that he's going to be telling us here is it says God gave us brains to use. That when you ask God for what to do, when you turn to God and say, okay, I've done my inventory, I've applied those spiritual solutions, I have got rid of what blocks me from you, God, what do you want me to do? You're not going to hear the voice of God tell you what to do. What you're going to do is you're going to take your best educated guess. At this point, I think he even says something along the lines of what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it's not probable that we're going to be inspired all the time. In other words, what he's saying is that as long as we're on this track of being and trying to find God's will and what God wants us to do, if we make mistakes and honestly want to learn from those mistakes and become a better person, then we're on the right track. But if you really don't give a flying rat's butt and you make mistakes and you just don't care, then it's probably a good chance that you're not going to make it. At the end of the bottom of the page here, step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. So he's fixing to tell us exactly what to do with this prayer and meditation deal here. Remember what he's saying here. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. And he's fixing to tell us here, this is the 11th-step inventory, that we're going to do the exact same thing, 4 through 9. Actually, 4 through 10 now, okay? We're going to take up all those other pages and bring them up to this page and say, now we're going to do this every single day. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. And these are the things that block us from God. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? And remember that these are what he called the most common manifestations of self that block us from being a selfless, self-sacrificing person. Someone who has genuine concern for other people, someone who thinks of other people, and is this agent of God's outpouring, outflowing, unconditional love towards others, from God through us into other people. And we're looking to find what blocks us from being that conduit of God's love. As the third step prayer put it, may I be a channel. Well, no, that's not. That's the St. Francis of Assisi, yeah. In the third step prayer, he says, the victory over my difficulties. Now, these are our difficulties. That victory over this resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid will be a witness to others of your power, your love, and your way of life, God. God's power, God's love, and God's way of life is what we're looking to become a agent of. And these are the things that are blocking us from this. Do we owe an apology? So that's step 4 right there. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Step 4. Do we owe an apology? Steps 8 and 9. Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? That's step 5. Were we kind and loving toward all? I think 6 and 7 is at the bottom of this paragraph. What could we have done better? ? So all of these question marks are to be answered in this 11th step inventory. Notice how he's got a question. What could we have done better? Obviously, you shouldn't have lied to somebody. You shouldn't have cheated them or stole from them. Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? ? Or were we thinking of what we could do for others? Of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection. You know, that could be one of the things that I've seen over the years is some people will have their sponsees make a list of their good attributes, and they'll say, well, you know, we don't want to get too morbid with this because you're always looking to find your anger, your fear, and your guilt, and they're just making this long list of things that you have done and made that you were a bad person. And the idea that you need to make a list of things that are positive attributes, I think, is misguided because a man explained to me once, he says, why, are these things giving you trouble? Are the good things in your life giving you trouble? Because the idea that we're trying to get across here is we're trying to find what blocks us from God so that we can get closer to God after applying the spiritual solutions to it. So what's the point of making a list of the good things in our lives? I mean, I think there even is in the 12 and 12 a line in there that says we write down some of the good things as to balance it out or something. I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? We're trying to find what blocks us from God so that we can better do His will. And if I write some of the good things down, what are those things blocking me from God? Or is just somebody, suffering from depression maybe? I don't know. I think somebody had said that Bill had that was during the time of his bout with depression when he wrote the 12 and 12. But anyway, I disagree with writing down the good things because it might take away from your actual hard work that's involved in writing down the bad things and getting rid of them with the solutions that we offer. For that would diminish, he says, but we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. Once again, there's a pretty good definition there, our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. That's steps 6 and 7 there. Ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. Now this next paragraph, we'll save that for next week. I'm going to open up the floor for open discussion. This next paragraph is how to pray, and the paragraph after that is how to meditate. In thinking of our day, we may face indecision. That's how to meditate. And on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. That is the actual 11th step prayer. I know that you were making some reference to the St. Francis of Assisi. That's a good prayer. That's in the 12 and 12, but the real 11th step prayer is right here where he says, we ask God to direct our thinking. Remember, any time in here that he says we ask God, that is some kind of instruction to turn to God and ask him something, to pray to God. Anyway, so we'll pick up there on the 11th step prayer, that paragraph, the third paragraph down. The third paragraph from the top. We'll pick up there next week. And so we've learned that there is a third inventory, the 11th step inventory, the when we retire at night inventory, that it's the same inventory as the others, and we are instructed to do the spiritual solutions, the forgiveness, faith in God, and making amends. We've learned that... Well, anyway, I don't want to take up much more time. We got 20 minutes for open discussion. Anyone who would like to share on anything that we read tonight or anything that you... All right, where do we keep our anonymity? Only at the level of press, radio, and films. Only at the level of press, radio, and films. And anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. We'll close with the Lord's Prayer. All right, where do we keep our anonymity? Only at the level of press, radio, and films. Only at the level of press, radio, and films. And anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. We'll close with the Lord's Prayer.